The pages we designed are pretty long, a lot longer than your average device screen is tall. Figma assumes that we would want to scroll the page vertically, but when we scroll, all content on the page scrolls together. Basically, Figma takes the entire frame and treats it as one big chunk of content. That's not quite what we want. Consider our navigation bar at the top. We want that to be visible at all times, even when you're scrolled all the way to the bottom. Let's go back to the editor to change how that works. If you're in Presentation View, you can get back to the editor by going to the Original tab or by using the menu at the top. In the editor, let's select the nav component, and in the right sidebar, change its position from Scroll with Parent to Sticky. Layers with their scroll behavior set to sticky will stick themselves to the top edge of their scrolling container. In this case, the scrolling container is our frame. This is a quick change, so how about we pop open the inline viewer to see if we got it right. Now when we scroll, the nav stays stuck at the top. Something doesn't look quite right though. The page content scrolls over the navigation menu, but we want the content to scroll underneath it so the navigation is always visible on top. This is because we made our entire page using auto layout, and frames with auto layout have a property called canvas stacking. Canvas stacking determines whether the highest layer or bottommost layer in the auto layout frame appears visually on top. This is particularly handy when using negative gaps between items. You may see this in components like a face pile with overlapping photos, and you may prefer one stacking order to another. By default, layers in an auto layout frame are ordered last on top. Open the auto layout settings and make sure canvas stacking is set to first on top. This makes it so the navigation frame, which is the topmost layer in the Layers panel, now appears above all other layers. Let's double check this in the inline preview. Looking good. But what if you want an object to stay positioned somewhere other than the top? Fixed position is a good option for that. Our case study page is quite long. Wouldn't it be a nice experience if a reader could jump back to the top of the page after they reach the bottom? Let's design a floating button that will act as a back to top button. We could create an instance of the button component we made in an earlier lesson, but then our new button will have the same visual weight as the other buttons on this page. We want to encourage people to contact us more than we want them to use the scroll to top button. Instead, we should make some minor adjustments to make it feel like a secondary action. Let's use our button main component as a starting point so we don't need to start from scratch. First, select the instance of the button and click Go to Main Component to find it on our Components page. Duplicate the main component in the Buttons section to create an instance, then detach it. Remember, detaching an instance permanently breaks the connection to the main component, but we're just using it as a base for a new component, kind of like a template, so we won't need it to be connected to the original anymore. Since we want this button to have a lighter visual weight, use the Swap Fill and Stroke shortcut to remove the black fill and add a stroke instead. Then, change the text fill color to black to match the outline, and add a solid fill to the button frame, like this color, which matches the site background. Next, update the label for the button to something short and descriptive, like back to top. You could also try other variations, or type 2 carets in a space, which Figma will convert to an up arrow symbol, if you want a more minimal approach. Then let's turn it into a new component named button/secondary to distinguish it from our other primary button. While we're here, let's call that one button/primary. Let's go back to our portfolio design and add an instance of this new button to the case study page. Figma automatically added the button to the auto layout flow. By default, objects in an auto layout frame can't be positioned freely, but let's use Ignore Auto Layout to exclude our button from the auto layout flow. This allows us to ignore the rules set by auto layout, so we can position the object precisely within the frame without taking it out of the frame. Drag the button to a place that you like. Maybe down here, so when we're scrolled all the way to the bottom of the page, it sits neatly in this empty space of the footer. Then, in the Prototype tab, change the position to Fixed. When a layer's position is set to Fixed, Figma will move it to a new section of the Layers panel, above other layers that scroll. Our new button looks great on the canvas, but if you preview this page, you'll notice that the button isn't there, not even when we scroll all the way to the bottom. This is due to the layer's constraints. Earlier, we explained that Figma's default scrolling behavior takes the entire frame or page and treats it as one large piece of content. Our button is positioned far away from the top of the frame and doesn't scroll with the screen since it's fixed. So it's in your prototype, but it's just really far down. We can't see it there. We could move the button higher in the frame so it's within the computer's display, but that doesn't work well with screen sizes that have different heights. Instead, we can fix this with constraints. When you use constraints on objects with fixed positions, you're telling Figma how you want to position the object relative to the sides of the viewer window. We've positioned our button near the bottom and right edges of our frame. So let's change the button's constraints to bottom and right. Figma will display the button in a fixed position with offsets relative to those edges. Back in the inline viewer, we can see the button appears in the bottom right corner and stays fixed as we scroll the page, or if we resize the window. Now it's time to add our scroll to interaction. Scroll to is an action that tells Figma to move the user to an object within the same frame. Select the button we just added and add a new interaction from the right sidebar. Keep the trigger as onClick and change the action to Scroll to. Since we want this button to take a user all the way to the top, we'll choose Navigation from the menu as the destination, or where Figma should scroll to. The animation is set to Instant by default. If we preview this in the viewer, you can see that this doesn't feel like a scrolling experience to a user. If you blink, you'd miss it. We want to communicate to the user that they are moving from the bottom of the page to the top using animation. Change the value to Animate and make sure the easing curve is set to Ease Out. Duration is how many milliseconds the animation takes, or in our case, how long it takes to scroll to the top. If we place our mouse cursor over the preview, Figma will show an example of what the animation will look like. Let's set the duration to 400 milliseconds. We can also create scroll to interactions directly on the canvas. Let's do that with the case studies text link in our page navigation. When a user clicks this link from the home page, we want for them to scroll down to the list of case study cards. This link also exists on the case study page, and if a user clicks the link from that page, we want them to be sent to the same place. We can actually create both of these connections at once. From the Design tab, select the text layer in one frame, then choose Select Matching Layers in the sidebar, or use the keyboard shortcut. Figma will recognize that these are the same layers but on different frames, and add the other one to our current selection. Next, open the Prototype tab and click the plus symbol on the canvas. Click and drag a connection from one of the links to the section title frame on the home page. Figma will create both connections at once. Since we still have both of the connections selected, some of the values will show a mixed state. You can deselect the connections and click on each one at a time to see their properties. We can see that the home page was set to scroll to and copied the same animation properties we just set on our last scroll to interaction, while the other connection was set to instant, like our other navigate to connections. Let's run through a few more interactions that you can make to wrap things up. A common design pattern is to click the word mark in the nav as a quick way to return to the home page. We could also give users another way to get to your case studies besides the button, like if they click on the card's image. You may see this on e-commerce websites where clicking the product image will take you to a page with the product's details. We may also want to add interactions to the email address and word mark in the footer, but that's up to you. If you have more projects that you've worked on, try writing up more case study pages for those projects, and then hook them up to the prototype from the other case study cards. In this lesson, we learned a few key prototyping terms, made connections to navigate between frames, interacted with our prototype using the inline viewer, and learned how scrolling, fixed position, and constraints work. Through testing our site, we discovered a need for a secondary button, thus improving our portfolio's user experience and showing that prototyping can always be done alongside design work.